Hello and welcome to our webinar, Combat Employee Turnover, Meet New Customer Demands, and Boost Efficiency with Samsung, brought to you by Samsung. I'm your host, Katie Bavoso from the Channel Company. The fallout of the global pandemic drove major changes to the way we buy and consume products and services. Consumers are now demanding the same fast, personalized experience they get when shopping online when they shop in store. This means the tools businesses are using have to keep up with the times. And this need creates new business opportunities and revenue stream potential for channel partners. Samsung Connected Associate is the strategy partners can use to meet the increasingly digital demands of their clients. Today, we'll break down all of these points into 3 segments. And joining me to do that is Bruce Harrier, Senior Manager, B2B Business Development, Retail Vertical at Samsung. Welcome, Bruce. Great to see you.
Hi, Katie. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for being here. Let's go ahead and get started with our first segment, a digitized landscape. I opened by mentioning how post-pandemic consumer expectations have changed the buying experience. Let's talk more about that and expand on it. How did the pandemic change industries like retail, hospitality, and more? And what are consumers now expecting from these businesses in those industries compared to just 3 years ago?
Yeah, obviously it's huge. I think all of us as consumers have experienced this, but I think what's interesting is that there's not one sort of answer, one size fits all, and especially now that we're largely past the pandemic, or at least the most stringent parts of it. You're seeing examples of behaviors and ways of doing business that flourished during the pandemic, such as curbside pickup, buy online, pick up in store, as well as certainly things like delivery, especially using couriers like Uber Eats and DoorDash and things like that. Obviously, those grew exponentially during the pandemic, and some consumers have continued to use those services in the same way that they did. Others have sort of reverted back to form, and that varies depending on the type of consumer, geography, demographic, the type of retail establishment that it is. So, in my neighborhood, the grocery stores that heavily invested in curbside delivery and so forth, whenever I go to the grocery store, those stalls are empty all the time. And so I think that's, obviously that's anecdotal, but it's an example of the fact that not one pattern of buying or one habit has sort of stayed in place, and that even goes for things like some, maybe people aren't familiar with this, but some retailers have even dabbled in virtual selling, remote selling, where it's really sort of a hybrid of a digital experience with physical experience, because it's being guided by a retail sales associate in a store that can show merchandise and so forth. So it's really fascinating to see how all of those different sort of ways of doing business have exploded, and none of them are going away, but there's not any one way that a retailer is succeeding, right?
Very much so. Some great examples in there. It's very familiar ones, I'm sure, for all of us by this point, Bruce. So with all of that in mind, what kind of burden is this putting on the associates who work in those industries?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is during the pandemic, we heard a lot about frontline workers, and how important they are to the day-to-day processing of grocery stores and things like that, to get those critical goods in the hands of consumers. And what really happened is that those frontline workers, they were cashiers, they were stock clerks. Now they were asked to go and pick online orders and take merchandise out to, curbside pickup or to facilitate deliveries. All those increase in tasks, they didn't come with commensurate increase in staffing. Pretty much every retail establishment or restaurant establishment, they pretty much tried to layer these additional tasks onto their people without any additional staffing. So it really kind of atomized what a retail associate had to do. going from helping customers in store to picking an online order to restocking shelves. It really made these people stretched very thin. Obviously, a lot of them chose to quit, right, or chose to look for other employment. And so, we call this, the Great Resignation is what everybody sort of calls this, or quiet quitting. All of these trends in the workspace, those were felt most acutely by retailers, by restaurants, because of the number of people that they need, at the edge serving customers. There was a profound impact in terms of an industry that already had massive turnover. We've seen it get more and more pronounced, both during the pandemic and beyond.
Definitely, Bruce. And we'll be talking more about those turnover rates later on in the webinar. But also keeping on this track, we talk about the challenges, we talk about the burden, but how is this forming new routes to market for channel partners?
Yeah, I think channel partners, and really all of us in the technology industry, I think a lot of us are used to, okay, I have this widget and this is what I sell to my customers, right? And okay, you can have widget A or you can have widget B, and we think in terms of features and functions and cost and all of these sort of like easily identifiable things. And I think what these trends are challenging channel partners to do, and again, more broadly the entire industry, is to really listen to customers, listen to businesses, and listen for opportunities to help solve problems, rather than waiting for the customer to say, I need this device or I need this piece of software, right? It's the routes to market and the needs are going to come from different places, and they might be things that you don't expect. So I think it's really getting all of us as technology salespeople, if you will, to listen to our customers and to really think about solving the problems that are in front of them.
That brings us right into our second segment, Get to Know Samsung Connected Associate. In this segment, we'll talk about the opportunity channel providers have with Samsung Connected Associate. So first of all, what is Samsung Connected Associate and what challenges is it designed to solve? And of course, in what industries?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to say is that obviously I'm a retail guy, and in the retail world, we tend to use although that's a very American thing to say associate. It's sort of like a user-friendly way more of saying employee. But the concept started in retail. So I think the first thing to say is that Connected Associate started in retail, and we'll talk just here in a second about some of those use cases. But really, the concept is transferable and applicable to pretty much any industry that employs frontline workers at scale, right? So whether that's healthcare, whether that's education, law enforcement, transportation and logistics, manufacturing, anytime you've got people that are working out in the field away from a desk, especially if they have to interact with the public, traditionally, companies have, looked at, okay, well, we have to have a handful of devices that are shared. And what that ends up doing is it ends up letting that frontline worker kind of fend for themselves a little bit. And oftentimes what we see is we see them using their own personal device to try and do their job. And that's really just a bad fit for a number of levels. So what Connected Associate in retail is really trying to do is to arm those frontline workers, those retail associates, with knowledge, to democratize data, to allow employees, associates to be more effective in their jobs by making sure that every single one of them has a device that they can call their own, at least while they're on the clock. Okay. So rather than, if you think of a typical retail store, you might see, one set of people stocking shelves and they have a ruggedized scanner scanning inventory and things like that. But then if you go to ask that person for help, that ruggedized scanner maybe isn't really connected to the website to have product information. So, or it may not have, inventory location. They may not be able to help you out if a product is elsewhere. They might say, okay, you got to go over there, right? So it's really about making sure that everybody has access to data, everybody has access to information, so that we can do a number of different things. One is we can reduce the amount of friction for customers. I think that's probably the primary thing, is to say, hey, we can make it easier to shop, easier to find merchandise, easier to find information, easier to check out. It's also to reduce the dependence on single purpose devices. So what Connected Associate is really about is to say, hey, instead of having a ruggedized barcode scanner and a walkie-talkie, and you punched in on a time clock on the wall, and when you go to checkout, you have a fixed point of sale terminal. All of those things can be consolidated. All those functions can be consolidated onto a single handheld device. So that's really what Connected Associate is all about, is putting devices in the hands of as many people as possible, so that everybody can be more effective and serve customers and address all of those varieties of tasks that we talked about that now retail associates are faced with.
It sounds like it definitely makes each of those retail associates, as we were talking about as an example, really well-rounded, because they're not just doing one task at a time. They can do several things if their objective changes at the drop of a hat if a customer needs it. In that same vein, can you give me some real-world use cases in which Connected Associate is used?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the most notable use case or deployment that we can talk about is at the world's largest retailer, which is Walmart. And they invested in Samsung devices for their associates. And really what they focused on initially was really more from a human resources perspective. So they focused on being able to clock in and out, to be able to view their shifts and swap shifts with other employees. They wanted to make sure that they had access to bite-sized training. Okay, so we kind of sometimes call it TikTok training, where they have all of the things that sort of the employee journey, if you will, from onboarding, clocking in and out, setting their schedule, accessing their tasks, accessing training. That's really where it started. And I think, I think that's a really interesting dynamic for us, again, as technology salespeople, to look at the human resources department as a potential enabler of technology, which traditionally that's not been sort of their role. So on top of those use cases, those human resources, workforce management type use cases, they've also enabled push-to-talk communications. So again, retiring, walkie-talkies and so forth. Ability to access SharePoint type information, documents and so forth. So if they need, job aids and things like that, those are again accessible to them on the mobile device. And then as well, product locator. And in their case, they used voice-driven product locator, so that they don't even necessarily have to do a complex, lookup or anything. They can just ask the app, hey, where's this product that I'm looking for? And it'll tell them where it's located, what the inventory is, as well as maybe this is available online, so that if it's not in the store, I can go ahead and have, place an order on behalf of a customer. So that's really where it started. Now, obviously, that continues to expand. And certainly the capabilities of the Samsung devices allow for additional use cases to proliferate. But that's really where it started, and it's been sort of a profound impact in their business.
What differentiates Connected Associate from competing solutions or even single purpose devices? You talked about those a little earlier, but let's go back and explore that more.
Yeah, so I mean, Samsung, what we do in our B2B world is, I think, unique. I mean, obviously I'm biased, but uh, we sort of drive a unique balance between um, consumer styled devices. People like, Samsung devices where, we sell 500 phones a minute worldwide. And so we take that consumer styling and bring it to enterprise grade devices, but we don't make them big or bulky or heavy or anything like that. So, I mean, not to do a shameless plug, but this is the Xcover 6 Pro. And, it's very light, it's very thin, but it still has all of the rugged features in terms of, being able to drop it, being able to submerge it, that an enterprise customer is looking for. And so driving that balance and saying, hey, here's a device that you can give to all of the employees that are working in the store if you want to have like a shared model, or like what Walmart did, you can have a company owned personally enabled strategy where everybody can take this home with them. And again, because it has that consumer styling, it's something that a lot of employees would find as a desirable benefit of working for the company. A couple other things to kind of double down on that in terms of features that you wouldn't see in a consumer grade phone. There are programmable buttons on the device. So if you want to have dedicated buttons to push to talk or to invoke scanning with camera-based scanning, those are things that are sort of part and parcel of these devices because they are designed for enterprise. Additionally, Samsung is known for its security features. So both at the device level, as well as we have a suite of software tools called Knox, which allows for an enterprise company to control every aspect of the device's life cycle, from the time that it's shipped out to an employee to the time that we take it back from them. You have complete control over that. And that's combined with something that a lot of people aren't necessarily familiar with, is Android's operating system capability to have both a personal profile on the device as well as a work profile. And so you as a company can load apps on the work profile, knowing that that data from those apps is not going to make it into their text, a personal text message or something like that. So it really gives you the ability to have both total control as with an enterprise device, but you also allow people to use that device on their own time to watch Netflix, play games, whatever you want to do. So again, it's a potential benefit to a lot of frontline workers to be able to have a device like this, brand new in their pocket, that they can use for both home and work.
So, Bruce, attrition in the workforce has been a big concern of businesses since even before the pandemic. According to McKinsey, turnover among frontline workers in just the retail industry alone is 60%. How does Connected Associate impact employee retention and offset the effects of short staffing and turnover?
Obviously, Connected Associate, because it is a relatively new strategy, we're still collecting sort of the real world data that tells us about employee retention. But there's a separate McKinsey report that just came out actually that talks about frontline workers and what they want. And they surveyed a bunch of people, did a bunch of research, and obviously salary is at the top of the list in terms of what motivates people to stay with their company. But almost exactly at the same percentage point cited job growth as something that they valued in terms of staying with their current employer. And so it actually went into a lot of depth in terms of, that I think frontline workers, and certainly in retail, I've heard this, I've worked in retail for 25 years, there's sort of a built-in concept in a lot of retailers' heads that frontline workers, cashiers, stock clerks, associates, whatever, they're kind of disposable, right? That turnover is sort of built in, you're not going to stop it. And I think due to labor shortages and so forth, we're seeing people really take a hard look at, okay, wait a minute, no, maybe we do need to think of these people as people that we're going to invest in. And the McKinsey study kind of bears that out. And so by enabling people with information, giving them access to job postings for new, for promotions and things like that, giving them access to training that can help them better their job prospects, letting them know what's happening in the company, right? These are all things that those of us who work at home or work in an office with a laptop and have email up all day, we're kind of used to this. We're kind of used to having just information being broadcast to us. But if you're out in the field all day, you don't have a desk. And when you go home, you're not necessarily going to want to, get on your, some sort of work portal or something like that, even if the company allows that. And so we really feel like the data is going to prove out that giving people access to information that can help forward their career and make their job day to day easier is going to pay off in terms of retention. And the thing about retail, or and again, when we talk retail, obviously we're talking restaurants more broadly, and even you could cast out at Samsung, we also include hospitality in that definition. When you look at the number of people that we're talking about, it doesn't take a lot of improvement to create a lot of ROI, right? So if you have just an incremental reduction in turnover, or an incremental reduction in the time it takes to hire somebody, because again, if there's an empty spot, as long as that spot remains empty, presumably the work's not getting done, right? And so there's a lost productivity component. So there's 3 different metrics that we look at: turnover rate, cost of hire, and time to hire, which is where we're going to have the job not being done. Just small incremental changes on the margin of those numbers can extrapolate out into millions of dollars a year in savings for a typical company. So we're hopeful, as we see more and more retailers adopting this strategy, that we're going to see hard data that shows that it's not just an incremental change, that it's a significant change.
Let's now go into our final segment today. Segment 3, Samsung and the channel. So Bruce, what kinds of channel partners would benefit from selling Connected Associate?
Yeah, I mean, I think any company that deals with businesses that have large numbers of frontline workers, right? I mean, certainly a mom and pop restaurant that has 10 people working in it is still going to see the benefit, but it's not necessarily, it really proves out its scale is really where it comes to the forefront. So whether that's, again, education, transportation, healthcare, retail, hospitality, any place where you've got hundreds of frontline workers or more, if you're dealing with those types of customers, then a Connected Associate strategy, we think, can be compelling to those types of businesses.
How should partners build Connected Associate into their portfolios? And how does Samsung help them approach customers about this opportunity?
Most sales associates, or salespeople that are calling on these accounts, again, I kind of alluded to this earlier, we tend to have a product driven way of thinking about approaching customers. Hey, I have this product, I want to sell it to you. And I think by inverting that and listening and asking good questions and saying, hey, what are you doing about making sure that your people have access to information? And what are you doing about making sure that your people can communicate with each other effectively? I think that really is what can unlock this potential for channel salespeople. And it really goes beyond just, again, there's use cases that we haven't even mentioned. And when we start talking to customers about things, it's amazing how these things proliferate, right? So, one of the things that's front of mind for retail that I didn't mention earlier on is organized retail theft. And so there are providers that are basically creating tools for retailers to collect data and report incidents, as well as have sort of emergency communications, right? Where maybe, they can't dial 911 or something, but you just want to have a one button, panic button, if you will. You talk about even people that have like property management companies that have janitors. Like some people might say like, oh, why would I give a janitor a phone of their own? But then when you start thinking about, okay, well, they have to clock in and out, they have to access tasks, they need to record what they've done, hopefully, if we're going to, keep them, keep them productive. But they also need to be able to communicate. A lot of places, they need to be able to have, if they're the only person in the building, they need to make sure that they have ready access to emergency services. And so you can start to really, if you talk through this with just about any business owner or business leader, you can start to tease out these use cases that maybe you hadn't thought of, that start to reinforce that, yeah, if everybody had a device, we could make things more efficient, make our employees happier, all of that stuff. So I think that's really the key thing. And in terms of what Samsung does to enable that, I can tell you that at least from the retail side of the house, we've been evangelizing the Connected Associate story for over a year now. And that has actually spread to other arms, other verticals within the Samsung organization. So we're pushing that out in terms of top line marketing and thought leadership. But that's also something that we're continuing to evolve and educate our own people and sharing with our channel partners of, hey, here's some use cases, here's some partner solutions, right? So we talk a lot about, for example, we have a partnership with Microsoft. And so we talk about, hey, Microsoft Teams on the device as a huge enabler of a lot of different use cases. So it's not simply just, hey, channel partner, here's the idea, go forth. We're reinforcing that with high level marketing, thought leadership, as well as really specific proactive training.
So Samsung is obviously a well-known name on the end user side, but what makes Samsung the ideal channel partner to work with?
I think there's a lot of different things that I think that Samsung does really, really well for channel partners. Obviously, just in terms of the brand itself and being able to walk into a company and sort of, I do it all the time of, hey, Samsung is a consumer brand, but did you know what Samsung brings to the table in terms of enterprise devices for B2B? And I think a lot of people, the Xcover 6 Pro that I held up earlier, a lot of people don't know that Samsung has those capabilities. A lot of people don't know that Samsung has technology like DeX that is the desktop experience that allows a device like that smartphone to be plugged into a monitor and suddenly it behaves like a desktop PC. And those are really transformative technology things and branding things that we bring to the table that no one else does. But more specifically, in terms of how we interact with channel partners, there's a cadre of people within Samsung that do nothing but work with channel partners to make sure that they're successful, right? And so we have those boots on the ground, if you will, that are working daily with channel partners. They're also working with people like me that are more vertically focused to help make sure that the story is right, to help make sure that we understand the the landscape at a particular account and things like that, and help strategize a win strategy for that account. Obviously, there's also things like marketing development funds and things like that that Samsung offers to its channel partners, to where we can go to market together and be successful. One of the other underrated things that I forget to talk about sometimes, frankly, but over the past 2 years has certainly been something that's important, is that Samsung has a supply chain that is very predictable and very, how I want to put it, vertically insulated. So we have very little dependency on China specifically, and really very little dependency on sort of subcontractors and third-party vendors. So channel partners, when they make a promise to a customer, they can feel very confident that those Samsung devices are going to get to the customer in a timely fashion and not get snagged by some of the supply chain issues that we've seen impact the industry as a whole.
Bruce, you've just talked about the way Samsung combats those challenges in the supply chain, but how else does Samsung support its partners to go to market quickly and close more deals with Connected Associate?
The channel team continuously does enablement of partners, whether that's providing marketing materials, providing training. I go out and have done roadshow type events with channel partners to make sure that they understand the Samsung story, and they understand specifically Connected Associate and what's happening. Try to make sure, even to the point of making sure that they're armed with how am I going to deal with objections? How am I going to counter an objection that says, oh, well, I always buy my rugged devices from vendor X, and that's what I'm used to. Or I can't afford to give a device to every employee, or I don't see the value in that because they're just lower level people that are going to leave anyway. Those are all the sort of common pushbacks that we get on the story. And so I work with channel partners. The channel team within Samsung works with partners to make sure that they're enabled. And then again, like I said, we provide a sort of a wide range of information and assistance. And again, whether that's, hey, let's put together a campaign that focuses on Connected Associate and use some marketing development funds with the channel partner to drive opportunities along that line. Or whether it's, again, in some cases, now obviously it needs to bubble up to a certain level of a kind of a mid-market retailer or a mid-market company, but we can get directly involved in helping craft the strategy, craft the story, strategize on that account to make sure that both Samsung and the channel partner are successful.
That brings us to the end of our time together today, Bruce. Thank you so much for joining me. And thank you at home for joining our webinar. If you'd like to learn more about Samsung Connected Associate, simply visit the web address on your screen. Once again, I'm Katie Bavoso. Thanks for watching.